Today's video is just a few thoughts on blueberries. I love my blueberries. We're going to talk a little bit about my cuttings and the propagation and how my blueberries are doing this year. This bush is doing really well. It's got all kinds of berries coming ripe, tasting good. It's got some nice canes, new canes growing up in the middle, so this is a sign of a good healthy bush. I did have to put a bungee cord around the base here. I do this occasionally sometimes when you like to have it open and the branches growing out, and then they get so many berries on like this they want to fall down. So sometimes I just strap a bungee cord around as they get heavier. Otherwise these branches would be laying on the ground and we don't need that. And this bush right next to it is completely not properly pruned, and I do that part intentionally. This is a bush that was probably 50 years old or so, and I dug it out of a friend's yard and put it here. And it's way too thick of canes in here. But what it does when I let it grow like this is it usually produces thousands. This year is a low year, but it usually is just super full of super tiny berries. And that does, and they're sweet berries, but that does two things. If you like to cook with them, which we don't cook a ton, they fit in pancakes really well. And two, they're a good size for the birds. And I found that the birds actually prefer this bush to the rest of them because they can pick off the little berries. The goldfinches and robins and everything, they come and attack this bush, and if they raid this bush and leave the other ones alone, we're in good shape. But unfortunately they don't always come to this bush, but it is the number one bush of the birds, and then the other bushes tend to be mine. Another thing I want to show you that happened on the side of this bush, with this being on the hillside, when we've talked about cuttings in the past, this is a slope down to my garden back here, and one time the roots were being exposed because of the hillside, and there was a cane coming off a root that was there, and I took a shovel and just chopped that sucker off and took it over here because like I said, this is kind of a sacrificial bush for me. And I took that section that I just chopped off that had a little bit of root and a cane, and I took it over here. Okay, so I was talking about that root and cane that we cut off. I stuck it in the ground over here, and this is doing great coming up, and this is going to start producing berries really well. The unfortunate thing is the neighbors left the gate open and the goats got out, so you could see how the branches were eaten off, and where you see multiple tops coming up here is because the goats ate the top off of this and off of this, and then it spread into several branches, but that'll be fine. It's still going to grow healthy, it's going to recover, and we're going to have a lot of berries. But this is started from just lopping off the bottom of that hillside where a root was exposed with a cane. It was just a little cane in here. This bush right here is the one, if you saw my video, where I was planted in too thick of clay, and it was just dying out, and I ripped it out of there, and I mounded up some sawdust and some other material here and planted it here. I left one big cane. Actually, I cut this off this morning. I shouldn't have cut it off this morning, but I left one cane up there, and not the healthiest, but at least it had something to bring in energy from the sun. And now that the rest of this is doing really well, I cut it off this morning, and these canes are doing great. Again, the goat had stripped everything off 2 weeks ago. There's hardly any leaves here anymore, but again, this has come out in the last 2 weeks. This has. The goats pounded it, but we're getting some new healthy canes, and in a couple years, I'll get these old woody canes completely out of here, but in a couple years, I'm gonna have tons of berries on this bush. Okay, continuing talking about cuttings, I'm going to have a full row, expand my blueberries so I don't need as much yard. The kids aren't playing in the yard anymore, so we're gonna have blueberries all the way down the fence. What I've been doing in the goat and chicken barn, is putting a lot of sawdust, and I have the fir needles from my Christmas tree farm off the shaker, and I've been throwing those on the floor for bedding, and then I'm just scooping it up and I'm putting it here. Obviously, I just cleaned out the barn, what was this, last week. Obviously, I would not want to plant in this anytime soon, but I have some cuttings that are going to be planted another year from now in here. But this sawdust, sawdust is what most people recommend when you go to the commercial farm. They plant their rows, they get tons of sawdust and plant it in here. But the goat and chicken poop is going to have some nutrient in it. Obviously, it'd be too hot to do it right now, but the the manure from my animals will break down by the time I have cuttings ready, and I'm going to continue that on down the fence.
There we go.
Speaking of cuttings, here's the bushes that I did. I have a video of what I said, a different kind of cuttings, and I just buried them in the ground on New Year's Day, and they started popping up, and I brought them up and I couldn't find any roots. It was really thick clay, and I might have torn a lot of the hair-like roots off of it, but I just stuck them up here, and I have this more on bark chips. It'll be easier to get it out, or not just bark chips, but wood chips, and I just threw them in my garden here, and they're continuing to grow up. These are got some nice shoots, so each of these are going to be blueberry bushes that I'm going to transplant in a year or two. Okay, and always wanting to get more blueberry bushes, I was experimenting. Now this is actually just bark chips. I have about 8 inches in here, and I just stuck a bunch of branches in here in early January, canes in here. They were doing great until we had the 116-degree weather, and they died out. You shouldn't have cuttings out in the open southern exposure like this. I had them out in southern exposure. I did put this piece of plywood up recently on the south side, so on the hottest part of the day, they're in the shade. Cuttings should actually be much more shaded, and I'll show you some more that I'm doing here in just a second. But some of these are coming up, but the heat kind of got to these. The reason I wanted here is I had a space prepared, and I have sprinklers that water the yard for a little while every morning, so there was going to be moisture there, so I thought it'd be easy. But you really need more shaded space for cuttings. So you could see these that died out in the heat, they didn't have enough, but these are all just branches that I pruned off in the normal pruning anyway, so there's no loss. Just stuck them in the ground to see what would be there. So this is going to become a nice bush, and several of these are going to do well in the future. Okay, here's how you properly place cuttings. When we went to Columbia Fruits, and they were showing us how to prune their farm where they do millions of pounds of blueberries every year. They were pruning in January, and there were just canes laying there. Hardwood cuttings are not the easiest, but there was canes laying everywhere, and I don't have Liberty and Legacy on my property, and they were doing Liberty and Legacy there. So what I do is every morning I take my watering pot, and I just simply run a little bit of water when I'm doing my chores, and then I go and feed my animals. But then this is just fir bark, fine fir bark, and the water just runs right through it, but it'll hold a little bit of moisture. It does sit in the pan, so it can, not a pan, but it's a little bit of tray that holds it, so if I'm not around, it can wick up some more water and go there. Now, when I say this is how to properly do it, I've actually pulled it a little bit out from the house right now, but normally they sit under the overhang of the house, and so the midday and afternoon sun don't hit it at all. You can see there's a little bit of a shadow here, but these big fir trees that are here where the sun can hit them, it's actually, what sunlight there is early morning sunlight filtered through the fir trees. So you're supposed to, when you do cuttings, and since they don't have a whole lot of root, put them on the north side of the house. They're in daylight, but they're not in direct sunshine. So these do get a very minimal amount of direct sunlight. They're protected by the house and the trees, and so the hot weather is not going to burn them up, and I don't have to spritz them with water all the time. They've been holding, as you can see, they've been holding enough moisture just in the fir bark, and me walking through each morning just dripping it on there, and they've been fine. So I cut a pop bottle that's clear for the sake of showing my horticulture class and you guys and for myself to see how long it takes to grow roots. For 4 months we didn't see any. Obviously the callousing happens first and then the roots start to grow. But this cane that comes down here close to this side, you can see that there's a little bit of root growing on this side. It is now July 31st, and we planted these in mid-January, and I think you could see a little bit of root over here as well, but this is the best. Thanks for joining me on the Flanagan Homestead, where Christmas trees are my business, teaching included horticulture is my job, and outdoor projects are my passion, like growing blueberries, and blueberries are up there high on my list. Hope to see you again soon, and I love comments and questions. Have a good day.